برز دكتور سیمون بەبابەتی گرنگی بە دوواداچوون لە یاسای تاوانی نێودەوڵەتی لە چوارچێوەی سیستەمی نیشتیمانی نەتەوەیی لەگەڵمان دەبێ فەرمێ بۆ پێشکەشکردنی بابەتەکەی.
Okay, so good morning everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Simon Minks. I'm a senior prosecutor in the Netherlands. I'm dealing with war crimes and terrorism cases, and I'm also a UN consultant. I would like to thank the organization KCIL for having me in this important conference. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you just to give you an overview of my own experience when it comes to international criminal law. And I start with this picture. The first picture, as you can see here right now, is also my email address. So if you have some further questions after the conference, I would be happy to answer that, and you can send them to that email address, wim.minks@om.nl. You might also recognize, of course, the picture in this first slide. Unfortunately, this is an iconic picture. It changed my life when I was involved in the so-called Van Anraat case. I will come later back on that during this presentation. But this is a terrible sight, and this is one of the cases I was dealing with during the years. I don't know whether you know something about my background. I have been a lawyer for almost 10 years, a judge for 3 years in a local district court, and a public prosecutor since 1999, and specialized in prosecuting war crimes and terrorism approximately since 2007. Before I continue, I might ask also the organizers if this is translated immediately, simultaneously, or if I have to stop after I have.
Yes, it is. We have simultaneous translation available. Yes.
Okay, and
Yeah,
I'm
okay,
not going
thanks.
too fast.
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Let's go to the third slide, not the second slide, but the third slide. This is the abbreviations during my presentation, and then go please to the next slide, please. Yeah. During this presentation, you will see that some lines are in blue. That is the source of the presentation of this slide. So this is about the Global Terrorism Index of this year, and you will find the source in blue. If you are interested in what's going on in the world related to terrorism, you can always go to this index. And as you can see, at the moment, 4 terrorist groups are responsible for the most deaths in last year. You will not be surprised that ISIS is one of them, but also Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, and the Taliban Pakistan, and of course Al-Shabaab. Interesting for you might be also that Al-Shabaab is not only working in Yemen and in Somalia, but I also got some information that Al-Shabaab also now is present in Afghanistan. So that learns us that terrorist organizations are working international. They are not bounded by boundaries, but they are moving away to other countries as well. So this slide is about 9/11. I always use this slide with presentations because 9/11 was a wake-up call for a lot of countries, including the Netherlands, Western Europe, but also other countries in terms of whether you have the right legislation in place. For instance, is it covered that if you take some flying lessons, just what the hijackers did at 9/11, but only with the purpose to commit a terrorist attack, is that covered by the legislation? So the Security Council of the United Nations asked all the nations, all the member states, to assess their own legislation, whether they have the proper legislation when it comes to terrorism in place. And I would say, in addition to that, later on, also whether you have the international crimes, the core crimes also in place when it is necessary. I will come back to that later when I'm talking about terrorism in combination with international core crimes. So please go to the next slide. Just to give you an idea how we are organized in the Netherlands in terms of organization. You see two national public prosecution offices in the Netherlands. The first one might be interesting for you because there is the International War Crimes Unit, 3 prosecutors and their staff only dealing with domestic prosecutions related to international core crimes. And also in that office, the National Coordinating Public Prosecutor for Counterterrorism. And these two are working increasingly together when it comes to serious crimes, prosecuting serious crimes, and a combination of international core crimes and terrorism offenses. And I'll come back to that later as well. In the second bullet point, you see that we also have 2 special prosecutors when it comes to financing terrorism and nowadays also sanctions. And you would not be surprised that we are also increasingly working together with them as well. Every district prosecution office in my country, in my jurisdiction, has at least 1 specialized prosecutors when it comes to counterterrorism, extremism, and radicalization. But we also have some other specialized prosecutors dealing with cybercrime, but also with discrimination, group insult, etc. And we are working together with them as well when there are cases related to that as well. In the appeal stage, the public prosecutor is named Advocate General. That is my job. My job is the National Coordinating Counterterrorism Advocate General in appeal. So that is a senior prosecutor in appeal, overseeing all the cases in the Netherlands, covering all the cases in the Netherlands when it comes to counterterrorism and also international crimes. So that's for how we are organized. Maybe we can go to the next slide, please. To understand my system and other systems as well, you have basically 2 different systems, the common law systems and the civil law systems. We have a civil law system in my jurisdiction and in most of the Western European jurisdictions. And in my case, when it comes to prosecution, it is important to understand that we have a prosecutorial discretion in the Netherlands, which means that we are not mandated or obliged to prosecute if someone approaches us. Let me give you an example. If someone, for instance, with a Kurdish background or a Yazidi background or a Christian background living in the Netherlands approached the specialized police and say, we see a certain person who has been torturing me or has been committed all kinds of international crimes, it is up to us to assess the file, the perspective of the file and the evidence as well. And we can come to the conclusion that we don't believe that there is enough evidence in order to get a successful prosecution. So then we are not going to prosecute. We also can decide to prosecute, of course, but in case we are deciding not to prosecute, it's not the end of the situation. The victim, the complainer, can always go to the Court of Appeal, and in front of the Court of Appeal there will be a new deliberation about the case, and at the end the Court of Appeal can force the public prosecution to prosecute. So also in cases where we believe that there is not enough evidence or not enough perspective in order to get a successful prosecution. But it is very briefly how the system is working. You see the blue line at the end. Human Rights Watch wrote an interesting report regarding different jurisdictions where you can read about the way prosecution is organized in these countries as well. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. So we have a civil law tradition, which means in my situation that I, as prosecutor, I am in charge, I am in the lead, I am responsible for the acts of the police. If you compare it, for instance, to the common law system, but probably also Judge Corner will say something more about that. In the common law system, the police can start their own investigation and at the end, very briefly, hand it over to the Crown Prosecution Services. That is not the case in my jurisdiction. In my jurisdiction, they can only start prosecution and an investigation with the permission of the prosecutor. It also means that if they make mistakes, I am the one to blame. I am responsible for the acts of the police. So in the worst case, if there is, for instance, a huge infringement of human rights, I have to stop the whole investigation. And you might imagine that it is a real tragedy dealing with terrorism cases or war crime cases, to explain that to the victims and to the audience and to the whole community, that you have to stop, to terminate the whole investigation because of these mistakes. To be honest, in the 26 years that I have been a prosecutor so far, it only happened once. In daily practice, we build up a serious and sensitive relationship with the police. You are working together, and I'm very lucky to work with specialized police in my field. So I work with specialized police when it comes to international core crimes and also when it comes to terrorism offenses. In my system, we also have an investigating judge. We don't have lay judges. We have full professional judges. We also have a full disclosure. So no secret evidence is allowed. Of course, there are certain exceptions, but that is not for this presentation. Very interesting. But in most of the cases, it is a full disclosure, so everything must be in the file. So let me give you an example how that works. If I need a wiretap, I ask the police to come up with a report to state the relevant facts, and I go with that report to the investigating judge. And the investigating judge can decide whether to grant my request for a wiretap, but she can also refuse it, or she can limit it in time. In other words, I need for certain coercive measures the permission of the investigating judge. And both the request as well the decision of the investigating judge must be in the file. So if you are the accused, but also if you are the judge, you can check whether it is all done according to the Dutch law. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is also about jurisdictions, and we have different jurisdictions, and I saw already, so I'm very briefly with this, that Judge Corner will elaborate a little bit more on this, but this is just an overview. I will focus on the domestic prosecutions, but you can see you have an international, you have hybrid jurisdictions as well, and you have the domestic jurisdictions. Okay, please go on. So this is how we are organized when it comes to the prosecution of international crimes. You see we have on top the international crimes when it comes to genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, etc. And basically we have a separate law for that, the International Crimes Act, which is basically a copy-paste of the Rome Statute. We also have a separate legislation when it comes to terrorism, which is mainly in the criminal code from Article 83, etc. Then you have, of course, the in-court crimes, as you can see where you can find it as well, and of course the breaches of NCJ measures. Okay, let me go on to the next slide, please. So as I see, this is the separate International Crimes Act in the Netherlands. It is copy-paste of the Rome Statute. As you can see, we have all these articles also here. Including enforced disappearance and nowadays very actual the crime of oppression, which is relatively new. But you know, they are talking about raising a tribunal with this concept in relation to the Ukraine. Okay, let's move on. So the question is, who is dealing with the cases, the ICC, or is it the local domestic prosecution? We have seen these decisions in the past in relation to the ICC also, but since I believe that Judge Corner is also elaborating about this, I leave it only with this cartoon. You have to make decisions, and for now it's important to understand that the ICC is operating on the basis of the principle of complementarity, which means that if another country is not able or willing to do the prosecution, it will end at the ICC, or there must be a referral of the Security Council. Otherwise, when we are going, and that's where my presentation is focusing on, we are going to the domestic jurisdiction. Okay, next slide, please. So just to give you an idea, what kind of cases are we dealing with in the Netherlands? It's not limited to this, but this is just to give you an idea. I already mentioned in the beginning the case against Mr. Van Anraat, one of the main suppliers of chemicals to Saddam Hussein. Then we have the case against Mr. Guus Kouwenhoven, who was aiding and abetting Charles Taylor in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Then we have some cases related to Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, people who are living in the Netherlands. But we also have some interesting cases related to the conflict, what happened in Sri Lanka, related to the Tamil Tigers, the LTTE, and also just international core crime cases related to former Afghan generals. You see them here, Hazem Jalasoy and also Faki Sana. Also Somali pirates we have been prosecuting, and the system I was explaining about when you are not satisfied with the decision of the prosecution in terms of when the prosecutor doesn't want to prosecute and you want him to prosecute, you go to the Court of Appeal. This is what we call so-called Article 12 proceedings. As you see here, I have been involved in several, including the very sensitive one related to Srebrenica. And of course, there are some other cases as well dealt in my domestic court related to Syria and Iraq and also Yemen and Libya. So now you've got an idea what kind of cases we are dealing with in my domestic jurisdiction in the Netherlands, but it is the same in France and in Germany and in other countries as well. Okay, next slide, please. Just to give you an idea also of our partner relationships, on top left, you see the public prosecution services, bottom left, the police, the national police and the local police. The two secret services are on the bottom on the right, the military secret services and the civil secret services. And in the middle, you see the National Forensic Institute. And if you take a closer look, you will see that all the arrows will end in the balloon right on top. That is the so-called NCTV, that's the National Coordinator on Terrorism. So that is assessing all the information coming from all the different partners, also from the immigration services, which is not on the slide, but it's also there, and other partners as well. They are assessing the all the information, and at the end, they will analyze it and will come up with a national threat level in the Netherlands. At the moment, it is 4 out of 5, which means that a terrorist attack in my jurisdiction is predictable, but we don't know when and we don't know where. But we are counting on a terrorist attack, considering the situation in this regard. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Special attention I would like to ask you for this slide. We have 2 public prosecutors who have a special role to play. They also have a bureau at the Secret Services. And they are entitled to get more information than the operational prosecutors like myself. How does that work in practice? Let's assume that there is some information coming from a source that there will be a terrorist attack tomorrow in The Hague, where I'm living. That information will be passed to one of these colleagues. My colleagues are entitled to look at the paperwork, are not entitled to speak with the source or to look at the source, but entitled to look at the paperwork, which is enough to give a reliable picture of this information. If they believe so, that the information is reliable, they pass that back to the Secret Services, and then the Secret Services start writing a so-called report. That report will be sent to, in this example, the prosecutor of The Hague, and it will lead, in most of the cases, to the start of an investigation. We can also use that report as evidence, not solely as evidence, but we can use that as evidence as well. You might ask yourself, how are things organized in terms of human rights? Because my work, your work also in the room, but my work is all about human rights, of course. The Defense Council always wants to get more information about these sources. However, it is not allowed to reveal the source in the Netherlands, to say something about the modus operandi of the secret services, and also not to say something about a level of knowledge. If you reveal something about that, that is a crime in itself. But nevertheless, in daily practice, my special colleagues will come up with an additional report. And if that's not enough, they can be interviewed in front of the investigating judge, and in exceptional cases, also in front of the whole bench. Very exceptional and also very unusual is to interview the head of the secret services. I only have that experience once, and to be honest, it is also more or less like an act, like a play, because you must imagine he is not allowed to say something about the source, not about the modus operandi, and not about the level of knowledge. So it is imaginable that in many occasions the lawyers are very frustrated by the way these things are going. However, this whole system is covered by the European Court in Strasbourg, European Court on Human Rights. Okay, next slide, please. So I think you are all aware in the room as well that there is no worldwide definition about terrorism, neither there is of radicalization or de-radicalization, but when it comes to terrorist intent, that is in most of the case, in most of the jurisdictions, more or less the same. It is about imposing fear, as you can read on the slide, try to force a government or to refrain from something or completely destroy the whole structure, like what happened in Syria. Okay, let's move on. And that brings me to the case I already mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation. One of the cases that really changed my life is this one. I was one of the prosecutors, so I was not the only prosecutor, I was one of the prosecutors dealing with this case. And it turned out to be that this Dutchman was one of the main suppliers of thiodictyl, which was used for mustard gas and purposed by Saddam Hussein's government against the Kurdish people. And you know, to add a personal note in this presentation as well, I've been dealing with international core crimes for a very long time. You have core crimes that, of course, are very serious. They are all serious. But this is the worst of the worst. You will die very slowly. And as I said, it changed my life when I was dealing with this case. I had to travel around the whole world just to build up this case, to find witnesses, to find enough evidence. These cases are very complex and also in time very long. So you have to be patient and you have to be an expert as well in order to come up to a successful prosecution in this regard. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. So just some questions we had to deal with in cases like this, about the intent, of course, but the intent of complicity in genocide, and also dual use goods. There are a lot of interesting questions to address, very complicated, and that is why we decided in the Netherlands to build up a specialized team only dealing with this kind of cases. All right, move on. Interesting for you to understand as well is that we increasingly use also battlefield evidence coming from Syria and Iraq, but collected by the military. How do you deal with that? Can you trust that? We're talking about photos, but it could also be forensic evidence, fingerprints on explosive devices. It could also be about emails. If you are interested to learn more about that, I can strongly recommend you this report from Eurojust from a couple of years ago, which is giving you an overview and also why it is used in different jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So if you have to deal with evidence coming from the military, collected by the military, it is interesting to know that there are some guiding principles, some guidelines, for instance, from the GCTF, which is the Global Counterterrorism Forum, or CTED, the UN organization, but also the US has their own guidelines, and the same goes for NATO. And the Council of Europe is working on their guidelines and probably also finishing at the moment. So there are a lot of guidelines how to work with battlefield evidence, also in terms of integrity, because the work of a prosecutor is all about integrity. It's about human rights, but also about integrity. I have to be sure that evidence that is collected, is obtained in a proper way, and not by waterboarding or so. So this could be useful for you if you are dealing with that in the future. Anyway, to know that there are some guidelines in this perspective as well. Next slide, please. Yes, just to give you an idea, at the moment there is a case pending in the appeal stage. I am one of the prosecutors there relating to Yazidi people. To be honest, and I'm also a little biased in this perspective, because I'm also a private advisor of the Free Yazidi Foundation. But I learned from them that the way you come up with the charges is very important for victims as well. What do I mean? They blame me in the very beginning that we only go for simple charges like membership charges of a criminal organization with terrorist intent. But while the facts where we were talking about are much more serious from their perspective, it could be a genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. So learn from this. We now try to combine charges. Sometimes we start with genocide charges when that's at stake, or crimes against humanity, but also in combination of terrorism charges, just also to show the victims the severity of the crimes. Next slide, please. I'm almost at the end. And I think Judge Corner will also touch upon this issue as well, but I would just like to say that deepfakes is a real challenge for you and I, and especially for practitioners as well, because I'm an old-fashioned prosecutor. I'm not trained by learning all these things. And in my time, not that long ago, a photo was a photo and a voice recording was a voice recording. And in the beginning, of course, I could also distinguish that someone with 11 fingers was fake. Well, nowadays, I have cases pending at the moment where people are saying, yes, this is my voice, but not in that context. And then you have to realize, if you are a judge, a prosecutor, an investigator, or a lawyer, how could that be possible? Could it be possible? And how do I write it down in a verdict or in my arguments in front of the judges? So deepfakes is the future. Unfortunately, manipulated evidence. We have to learn from that, how to deal with that. So one of the challenges is how to go along with this. Next slide. I think that's the last one. So there are a lot of contemporary challenges. I just wrote them on this slide. Decisions you have to make, the collection of evidence, but I leave that to Judge Corner as well. So there are some challenges, but the work we are doing, the work you are doing, the work you are doing in the north of Iraq, in Kurdistan, is very important. And also in relation to the available legislation, do you have the proper legislation in place as well? Please don't forget the victims, don't forget the Kurdish people, don't forget the Yazidis and the Christians. It is worthwhile to keep that in your mind. And that's all for now. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was understandable. I have no idea, but anyway, thank you very much.